In 1399, Richard II was deposed as King of England by his cousin Henry Bolingbroke. After his formal abdication of the throne at the Tower of London, Richard was taken north, where he would be held at Pontefract Castle in Yorkshire. It was here that the former king would meet his end. It's generally believed that Richard died a slow, miserable death of starvation. Some said that Richard's death was voluntary, as the shock and pain of his losing his throne proved too much to bear for him, and he refused to eat from there on in. But in reality, it's almost certain that Henry Bolingbroke, now King Henry IV, ordered Richard to be starved to death. The need to remove Richard, despite any family loyalties that may have lingered, was made all the more plain to Henry when a plot to kill him and his family, whilst they were staying at Windsor Castle, was foiled. Had the plot succeeded, Richard would have been restored to power. In short, whilst he lived, Richard would have remained a figurehead for rebellion against Henry, and so he had to go. Despite Richard's death in February 1400, Henry's reign would still be plagued by plots and rebellions throughout its 14-year-long course. Although it is widely believed that Richard II did starve to death, one medieval author gave a very different version of events. This account would heavily influence William Shakespeare's play Richard II. According to the anonymous author of the Trahison et Mort de Richard II, after the Windsor Castle plot had been thwarted, Henry IV told one of his knights, Sir Peter Exton, to ride to Pontefract and remove Richard II once and for all. On arriving at Pontefract Castle, Sir Peter found Richard waiting at the dinner table, ready to be served his dinner. Sir Peter told Richard's servant that he would no longer be required to serve Richard as he had been accustomed to do in the past. This meant he was not to carry out tasks such as tasting Richard's food in order to check for poison. If the unsuspecting and unaware former king didn't like his servant's sudden change of behaviour, then the king was to eat alone. Sir Peter, supported by 7 other heavily armed men, made it quite clear to the helpless servant that this was to be Richard's last meal. When Richard became aware that his servant was now acting under the orders of the king, he was irate, and struck the poor servant brutally over the head, cursing both him and the man who had taken his crown. Hearing this commotion, Sir Peter and his band of men stormed into the hall, brandishing their axes. If Richard was surprised, he didn't show it, and he lunged forwards and snatched an axe out of the hands of one of his would-be killers. He swung his axe like a madman, cutting down 4 of the 8 knights. Sir Peter leapt up onto his chair, where Richard had been sitting, and waited for his moment to strike. Still, Richard continued to defend himself, but as the fighting wore on, Richard began to tire. With Richard being forced backwards, the moment for Sir Peter came, and he brought his axe crashing down on Richard's head. Richard staggered and cried out, "Lord, have mercy on me," before he fell to the ground. Sir Peter ensured the deed was done by striking another blow into Richard's skull. When it was all over, Sir Peter sank to his knees and bemoaned the grisly act, stating that it would haunt him for the rest of his days. A king going down swinging like this makes for a far more interesting tale than simply saying that he died a lonely, miserable death of starvation. However exciting or not this story may be, it is completely false. After the deposed king's death on the 14th of February 1400, Richard's body was brought down to London, where it was put on public display at St Paul's Cathedral as proof that Richard had died of natural causes rather than foul play. It goes without saying that 2 blows of an axe to the head would hardly go unnoticed, no matter what precautions were taken. Henry would hardly have been stupid enough to order such a violent execution of his rival and then put his body on public display. The author of this tale also further undermines himself by saying Richard was buried at Pontefract. He wasn't. Richard was, as mentioned, transported to London before he was buried in Hertfordshire. Henry V later on moved Richard's body to Westminster Abbey.